Darwin used the finches to prove the previous question because, like Sam said, they had some unique characteristics depending on which island they lived on. So the finches had various beaks and behavior that were adapted to the specific foods that were available on their home islands. So because the food differed from island to island, the beaks of these finches tended to vary from island to island. And his explanation of how adaptations arise centered on natural selection. Okay, can someone tell me kind of what natural selection is? No, definition's on the screen. John, can you?
It's when some species that are like unsuited to the environment tend to like die out, but the ones who have like unique traits that are suitable are able to survive.
Yeah. So going over like what John said, natural selection is the process by which individuals that have certain inherited traits tend to survive and reproduce at higher rates than other individuals because of those certain traits that they have.
So in other words, nature is selecting traits for survivability. It's selecting those best of the best traits to carry on to the next generation.
Because like if you have certain traits that enable you to survive, then you're going to be more likely to produce offspring, then those offspring will carry those similar traits, and then that's kind of how natural selection helps one organism.
And I have another question for you. So would an organism with less suitable traits be prevented from breeding?
They wouldn't be prevented. It's kind of like goes down what happens. If they're not as suited, if they're going to have a harder time obviously surviving, and then there's nothing to stop them from breeding. But what generally happens over time is the less suited they are to the environment, there's more competition among the organisms that are better suited to the environment. And then because the organisms that don't have certain adaptations, they can't compete, and then that's what eventually causes them to.
Outstanding.
Okay, so Darwin's essay. In the 1840s, Darwin worked out the major theories of his hypothesis, and he wrote long essays about descent with modification and its underlying mechanism, which he called natural selection. Darwin published his book on the origin of species by means of natural selection, and within a decade, Darwin's book and his ideas convinced many scientists that life's diversity and its product of evolution.
Alright, so earlier I mentioned what were basically the two main ideas of the origin of species. Can anyone tell me what they are? Sam?
He's saying like what Darwin's
The two main points of the book.
that evolution is happening over like a period of time.
That is one of them, yeah. Cameron, do you know the second one?
It's natural selection.
Yeah, so what it was basically was that evolution is the reason why we can connect all these different life forms on like how they're diverse, but at the same time they're also very similar. And then the other one was natural selection. And so instead of really using the word evolution, Darwin kind of based everything that he did as descent with modification, meaning that there is unity in all life and they all come from a common form ancestor, but through descent and through modification we've developed all these different life forms. And a big part of that is the habitats that these organisms are living in, because they have to adapt to the challenges that they are presented, and they need to be able to keep living regardless of what's going on in their environment. And so the analogy that he would use was that life is he kind of used the tree of life. And so what it was essentially is that there is a common ancestor, and that all the different species, all the different types of life, they can all be different branches on a tree of life, but at the same time, so the different branches all represent different types of organisms, but they still have that common unity in that tree. And he also realizes that most like branches are like dead ends, because 99% of species that have ever lived have died out, and that there are animals that fill kind of like the gap between past ancestral forms and animals today. And so like an example would be like, we have elephants, and the nearest animal to an elephant is a manatee, but the thing is like there's no animals in between that kind of show the development of an elephant. Like those have all died out, and all you can really find is manatee and elephant, which are two really different animals. And so, biologist Ernest Mayr, he kind of looked at his theory and he came up with 3 inferences based on 5 observations. And so the first observation is that populations are going to keep increasing if reproduction keeps happening successfully. And the second observation is that regardless of that, population size tends to stay the same, and that resources are limited. And so his first inference was that, so even if production of more individuals in an environment really just leads to like a struggle and a fight for survival because there's not enough resources to accommodate all these individuals that are reproduced. His fourth observation was that members of a population, they often like vary very much in what their characteristics are, and a lot of this variation is heritable. And so the second inference that he made was that survival depends a lot on these traits that you inherit, and so individuals that inherit these traits that are good for the environment, they tend to have a more likely chance to succeed in the environment and to reproduce more than those that do not have these traits that are adaptable to the environment. And that, so then this unequal ability for animals to have the same success rate in these environments due to these traits leads to like characteristics of a certain population dominating and soon enough taking over the population. And this is where this is kind of where evolution occurs and where the stem of modification occurs, where they adapt better to the environment that they live in. And so if you study any particular species, you'll notice that the ability to overproduce is definitely present. Like for example, of the amount of eggs laid, like not all the eggs laid or not all the seeds produced completely develop and leave offsprings. And so many times the rest are either starved, deceased, unmated, or unable to produce. And so that's kind of where we go back to like these inferences. Like there are reasons in which these traits that they inherit and these adaptations that they have, why these survive over like the original animal, like their adaptations to the environment so that they can live better and they can survive better in a certain habitat. And then artificial selection, what it is that over time humans have found ways to modify animals, to modify plants, and so to have like the traits that humans want these animals or plants to have, and this is called artificial selection. And so what this really means is that sometimes crop plants or animals, they really don't have much resemblance to what their original life form was because of the way that animals have breeded them. So then if we just kind of review natural selection, so it's the different success in reproduction among individuals that vary in traits that they inherit due to interactions with the environment. And so over time, this is going to help animals adapt. If an environment changes over time, natural selection is going to force these animals to change too, to continue their adaptation to make sure that they survive well in this environment. And a big topic would be like, an individual itself does not evolve, even though an individual might possess certain traits that other people in other organisms in his population don't have. The individual itself can't evolve. The smallest unit that can't evolve is a population, and it's the smallest unit that you can measure in its process of evolving. But overall, yeah, it's just the populations that evolve. There are traits that can be inherited and traits that can't, and they're adaptations. But it's how a species or a population moves towards adapting, not just how one individual can